Hey guys, welcome to another episode in the deep playthrough of AC Unity. Trying, we are like in the epilogue part of the deep playthrough before continuing with the Dead Kings DLC, which I do think I will make a separate playlist. I'm mopping up all the database entries to also include that in the deep playthrough. It's part of the game, all the, I don't know if you could call it lore, but all the historical backstories and stuff. So, well, let's continue. To have this all included. In the previous 3 episodes, we did the general part of the persons category. Now we are going to groups. Alright, Estate General Deputy. In March 1789, elections were held to select the 578 deputies of the 3 estates. The list of deputies included such men as Robespierre. One moment, I'm just curious, because in the previous episode we read about the French Constitution. Oh, that was later. But this French, there was like this Declaration of the Rights of and citizens, and I think that also was in 1789. But I was curious about the exact date. Ces derniers articles sont adoptés le 26 août 1789. So 26 August was it finalized. Alright, but so this, and that was later also became part of the French Constitution. I think that was a year or 2 later. I think in 1791. Yes, September 3rd. Alright, so we are now a little bit before the Declaration of Rights of men and or women and citizens, like half a year before it, a little bit less. In March, the elections were held to select the 578 deputies of the 3 estates. The list of deputies included such men as Robespierre, Mounier, Barnave, and the Comte de Mirabeau, who, although a noble, chose to sit as a deputy of the 3rd estate. Most of the men who comprised the 3rd estates were in their late 20s or early 30s. The plain black clothes worn by the deputies of the 3rd estate contrasted sharply with the luxurious, brightly colored garments of the nobles and the clergy. Also, they were very slimming. So lame, these footnotes. Jacobin Club, the Society of the Friends of the Constitution, or Jacobin Club, deriving its name from the convent where its members gathered, was one of the most powerful political clubs in France for much of the revolution. With over 7,000 chapters at its height, its membership was estimated at nearly 500,000. The club was initially a gathering place for Breton deputies, but quickly expanded to allow anyone, even civilians and foreign nationals, to join. What is Breton deputy? Is that from Bretagne, like a region in France? Breton deputy. Or is that a person? Breton. The Club Breton was a group of Bretons or representatives attending the Estates General of 1789. The Breton nobles and upper clergy had boycotted the elections in the spring of 1789 and had consequently sent no deputies to Versailles. The Jacobins originated as the Club Breton at Versailles. Alright. Yeah, so I think that is from indeed Britannia or Brittany in France as a region, and later on it was expanded and became the Jacobin Club. Sounds pretty exclusive. Again, a lame footnote. Despite its later reputation for extremism, the Jacobin Club supported at least nominally the monarchy right up to the eve of the Republic. The club became radicalized in June of 1791 when many of its more moderate deputies left to form a new club, the Friand. The first thing I look for in any club is the ability to pronounce it. Friand is fail, or should that be few? After the fall of the monarchy, Robespierre rose to prominence within the club. And with his backing and that of the Parisian mob, the Jacobins effectively seized control of the government. They so often make such convincing arguments, the mob, I find. The Jacobins instituted a reign of terror, repeatedly purging the National Convention and the population at large of anyone deemed an enemy of the Republic. The Jacobins held sway for nearly a year before Robespierre overplayed his hand and was himself arrested and executed for treason. Deprived of its leadership, the Jacobin Club was closed and outlawed in November 1794. And when was Robespierre killed? I think also in 1794. Robespierre, July 1794. Place la Concorde, so that would have been a guillotine death. So 3 months later, maybe for 3.5 or so, the Jacobin Club was outlawed. Les Chouans. At the time of the revolution, counter-revolutionary bastions established themselves within France, the most famous and powerful of which was Les Chouans in the Vendée region of western France. Les Chouans rejected conscription into the National Army and, alarmed by the radical anti-clerical direction of the revolution, raised their own troops to oppose it. More largely, the term Chouan came to be associated with rural anti-revolutionary pro-royalist sentiments. They also came to be associated with the sound of sneezing. You could never be sure whether someone was discussing the Chouan or just had a heavy cold. Again, a pretty lame footnote. Non-juring priest. On July 12, 1790, the civil constitution of the clergy was instituted. This legislation determined that God's representatives would no longer answer to the Pope in Rome, but instead to France and its revolutionary government. They would be paid and overseen. 1 second. When did the Jacobins become more radical? In June 1791. So, a year earlier, even with the moderates, the revolutionary government was indeed proposing separation of church and state. They would be paid and overseen by the state. As a result, the church became part of French administration, which sought to ensure the loyalty of its representatives to the values of the revolution. Yeah, from another perspective, it's actually like a merging of church and state instead of the separation. But I think that merging is more to just keep control of the church instead of having its influence expanded within the government. Those who accepted this new order had to take a solemn oath to the nation, the law, and the king. Many priests did not view these changes favorably and refused to take the oath. Pope Pius VI sent his condemnation of the act the next day. Those who refused the oath were labeled non-juring or refractory priests. Many who refused were physically attacked for their piety to Rome. Alright, I already looked it up earlier, but I forgot. Refractory. Stubborn or unmanageable, resistant to a process or stimulus. One moment, please. Just looking it up. Alright, it's really like stubborn, so to say. And now my eye falls on another totally unrelated term in the results. Granules, a small compact particle of a substance. Alright, sans culottes. The term sans culotte literally goes without culotte or breeches. Initially referred to the common men who committed acts of violence in the name of the revolution. They were so named because they belonged to the lower classes who wore pantalon, trousers rather than culotte, breeches. Have you been to France lately? Many of the men don't wear trousers even now. Over time the term would expand to include all those who were opposed to the aristocracy and the counter-revolution. Swiss Guard. The Swiss Guards were regiments of Swiss mercenaries hired to protect the French sovereign and his places of residence. I admire the Swiss. I almost feel half Swiss. I'd make the argument for Swiss cheese being the best in the world, but it would probably be full of holes. These Swiss regiments were highly sought after in Europe. Since the Swiss cantons were reputed to produce good, obedient and ferocious soldiers. By the end of the 15th century, the Swiss 100 Guards, Saint-Suisse, was created and regularly stationed in Paris. By the middle of the 18th century, the protection of the Champs-Élysées, or Champs-Élysées, was entrusted to a detachment of 10 or so soldiers tasked with maintaining order and arresting lawbreakers. During the revolution, members of the Swiss Guard would protect Louis XVI at the Château des Tuileries, but were overwhelmed and massacred on August 10, 1792, once the sovereign and his family had taken refuge in the Salle du Manège, where the National Convention was held, and where the monarch would later be judged. On reflection, might I quickly apologize for the Swiss cheese argument joke I just made? I've not been feeling well lately. Yeah, again, very lame comments, footnotes. Man, I wish they would not have added these comments. They're so distracting and yeah, just pure lame, bordering on cringe. The Girondists, or Girondins, or Brissotins as they're also called, were a... I don't even understand what this footnote tries to say. So here it is like, oh, I admire the Swiss cheese is the best, but my argument would be full of holes. Then it says, okay, the Swiss regiment were good, and then it says the Swiss regiment was massacred in the Tuileries. And then it says, on reflection, might I quickly apologize for the Swiss cheese argument? Swiss cheese argument joke. That's / needs to be between argument and joke, right? Instead of between Swiss cheese and argument joke. I've not been feeling well lately. Alright, I have really no idea what this means. Is that because he now reads about the Swiss guards being massacred and maybe being punctured full of holes themselves? That she felt, or he or she felt, the reference to the argument being full of holes was offensive. I have no clue. It is just so stupid. Alright, the Girondists were a political group within France during the Revolution. They are generally depicted in opposition to the Montagnards, such as Danton, Robespierre and Marat. The political dividing lines were not as clear as they are for modern day political parties, but the two groups differed on several key issues. Alright, just put a comma there. The Girondists supported adults. The Girondists supported foreign wars and the federal government in the style of the newly formed United States. The Montagnards, on the other hand, opposed the wars and believed that Paris should predominate in politics. Yeah, it are autocrats. The revolutionaries also always are the autocrats themselves. The Girondists initially held most of the political power, but a series of political defeats led to their fall from grace and the rise of the Montagnards. By this time, Robespierre had grown obsessed with conspiracies, especially among his political opponents. On June the 1st and 2nd, members of the Girondists were placed under house arrest and moved to prison several weeks later. Yeah, on June the 1st of which year? Alright. In October 1793, 23 of the Girondists were executed for treason. Which makes it sound tidy. In reality, Henriot drove cannon up to the National Convention and threatened to fire if the politicians didn't give up the Girondists, activate sarcasm, and received a totally fair trial too. I'm sure, and sarcasm. Third estates. If the first estate was the church and the second estate was the nobility, the third estate was everyone else. It comprised beggars, peasants, the bourgeoisie, notaries, doctors, lawyers, artisans, bankers, and even scholars. Who at the time represented approximately 96% of the population. I don't think that means 96% of the population were scholars. If it did, this would be one terrifically nerdy time period. I dare say you and I would have fit in rather well. Again, a dumb footnote. In a pamphlet entitled What is the Third Estate, published in 1789, Sieyès wrote, "What is the Third Estate? Everything. What has it been until now in the political order? Nothing. What does it ask? To become something. Nothing be done without it. Everything would be infinitely better without the other two orders." Alright, let's quickly check who that Sieyès guy was. Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, usually known as the Abbé Sieyès, was a French Roman Catholic abbé, clergyman and political writer who was a chief political theorist of the French Revolution. He also held offices in the government of the French Consulate and the First French Empire. His pamphlet, What is the Third Estate, became the political manifesto of the Revolution, which facilitated transforming the Estates General in the National Assembly in June 1789. He was offered and refused an office in the French Directory after becoming a director in 1799. Sieyès was among the instigators of the coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9th, which installed Napoleon Bonaparte to power. Moreover, apart from his political life, Sieyès coined the term sociology and contributed to the nascent social sciences. Alright, like the what now has evoluted, or how do you? What is the verb of evolution? Is it a verb? Is there a verb? Evolution verb. Oh yeah, evolve, of course. The social sciences, I wanted to say, which now have evolved in totally, mostly irrelevant debating clubs without any hard scientific basis whatsoever, if you ask me. It's just sociology, cultural studies, whatever. It's more of a hobby than an actual science, I would say. But anyways, that were the groups. Now we go to Paris stories. They are like, I would say, compared to the general people, which are mostly like the big characters and all the assassination targets. It's more minor, I would say, than the general category. But it are quite a lot. So yeah, I hope they won't be that long, because I do want to finish this database thing by today, and I'm already 3 or 4 episodes in it now. But yeah, let's just go. The Red Ghost of the Tuileries. According to the legend, when Catherine de Medici set out to build the Tuileries Palace at the end of the 16th century, she expelled a German butcher, Jean Le Coulcheur, from the site. I bet you didn't expect to read the phrase expelled a German butcher just then. I know, I certainly didn't. Upon his death, Le Coulcheur swore that he would return to get his revenge. I think this is the weirdest story ever. An expelled German butcher with a French name gets so annoyed he swears revenge. Okay, and then what? Legend has it that the Petit Homme Rouge, or Red Ghosts, haunted the palace throughout its construction. Is this a dream? An angry German butcher stayed so annoyed he'd once been expelled from a site that he died and then haunted the palace. What? Astrologer Cosimo Ruggieri even informed Catherine that the construction of the palace would lead to her ruin, which it eventually did on January the 5th, 1589. Alright, when was it built? Alright, doesn't really say. For all that, rumors concerning the Red Ghost continued through the centuries. In 1789, Marie Antoinette asked a magician to protect her against the apparition. Marie Antoinette asked a magician to protect her against the ghost of an angry German butcher. Napoleon, who later resided at and okay, this is a pretty funny footnote. Napoleon, who later resided at the Tuileries Palace, apparently met the ghost who told him, "You shall be happy up until your 45th year. My task is to protect you. Thereafter I shall abandon you." What is happening? Am I high? Alright, let's... I'm curious when Napoleon died. Was that his 45th year? 69 to 21. So that is 31, no, he was 52 years old. Alright, but maybe something happened, so that would be 52, 7 years earlier. So that would be 1814. Let's quickly see if anything happened in 1814. Yeah, he was Emperor of France from 1804 until 1814, and again in 1815. Right, so how did he stop being emperor? Napoleon was moved to Longwood House on St. Helena in December 1815. It had fallen into disrepair and the location was damp, windswept and unhealthy. Alright, so he got kicked out of the country. Napoleon returned to Paris. Napoleon forces fought two coalition armies commanded by the British Duke of Wellington and the Prussian Prince Blucher at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Wellington's army withstood repeated attacks by the French and drove them from the field, while the Prussians arrived in force and broke through Napoleon's right flank. Napoleon returned to Paris and found that both the legislature and the people had turned against him. Realizing that his position was untenable, he abdicated in favor of his son. Alright, and then he was banished. But then I wonder, how long was his son in power? One second, let's see who his son is. Napoleon II, who lived only 21 years, was disputed emperor of the French for a few weeks in 1815. After the fall of his father, he lived the rest of his life in Vienna and was known in the Austrian court as Franz Duke of Reichstadt for his adult life. From the German version of his second given name, along with the title, he was granted by the Austrian emperor in 1818. Alright, he only served as emperor from June 22nd till July 7th. So that is literally 2 weeks and 1 day. Right, that was a little sidestep, sorry for that. Alexandre Lenoir. With the onset of the revolution, curator Alexandre Lenoir set about saving and protecting France's historic monuments, objects and properties. He successfully demanded that all national assets be confiscated and put into storage to avoid their dispersion or even worse, destruction. Lenoir openly fought revolutionary vandalism despite violently de-Christianization campaigns, but could only look on helplessly at the desecration of the royal tombs at the Basilica of Saint Denis. André Chenier, poet André Marie Chenier, was a student of the classics and ancient Greece. He rubbed shoulders with the foremost literary and aristocratic circles and was noticed for his writing. His ambition was to become the modern Homer. During the revolution, he contributed to the Journal de Paris, denouncing the revolution's excesses and openly criticizing Robespierre. Wow, that is Marat and the painter Jacques-Louis David. with satirical poems. This guy has some balls, I would say. Otherwise, he could easily have been rounded up and put on the guillotine. Having become a target during the September massacres, he left Paris for the provinces. He was arrested and guillotined in 1794. Ah, he actually was. Crazy period at that time. André de Guzman came to France in 1778 from Spain. An aristocrat, his lavish lifestyle brought him to the verge of bankruptcy. At the height of the revolution, he joined Jacques-René Hébert's camp along with the enraged and became a fierce and relentless opponent of the Girondins. He eventually fell in with members of the Bande Noire or Black Band, a group of speculators who specialized in issuing false banknotes or purchasing well below their price various chateaux and abbeys. Alright, this is like a, how do you call it? Chandelier or yeah, a con artist, so to say. Antoine Fouquier Tinville, born in 1746. Antoine Fouquier Tinville was appointed director of one of the grand juries of the tribunal, established on August 17th, 1792, to try the royalists arrested on August 10th after the fall of the monarchy. Man, 1 week later, they really didn't waste any time. In November of the same year, he became public prosecutor. In September 1793, the reign of terror became a matter of major concern. In the words of Fouquier Tinville, heads were falling like tiles. Oh yes, heads were falling like tiles, a common phrase at the time. Presumably, there were no decent French rulers in the 18th century. They were all too busy polishing. Alright, again, dumb footnotes. As public prosecutor, he was in charge of prosecuting culprits and bringing them to justice, which generally meant condemning them to death or otherwise doing the Committee of Public Safety's bidding. The day after the fall of Robespierre, he was relieved of his duties. A trial was brought against him in December 1794. When he was convicted, he pleaded in vain. I have simply been the convention's X. Does one punish an X? A bad workman pretend he's a tool. Another popular phrase there. He made his own trip to the guillotine on May 7, 1795. It is unbelievable what happened there. This is really revealing for me. I'm learning so much more about the French Revolution through this game compared to what I learned in school. But, especially all the intricacies and the complications and the I'm not sure what the word is, but all the I always forget these words. There's a word I'm looking for. Yeah, all the turns that the political factions all take for the better and the worse. Some are in power, they immediately go full berserk mode. Then a couple of months later they themselves are being beheaded. It's just crazy. Intrigue. I think I'm looking for the word intrigues. I'm not sure whether intrigue is like a correct translation to English. I do think it is. 1 second. We do so. making it a learning moment. Yes, intrigue. It's the same as in my native tongue Dutch. Antoine Lavoisier. Luckily these, oh, this is a long one, but others are luckily not that long. We already read this one, I think. The greatest, so maybe I will skip it. The greatest chemist of the 18th century, author of what would become known as Lavoisier's law. Nothing is loved, nothing is created, everything is transformed. Lavoisier, we'll just read it, also made significant contribution to the science of combustion, including the identification of oxygen and hydrogen, and his pioneering work on the list of elements. No one would better explain the world until Einstein. In terms of the revolution, Lavoisier was a supporter of new philosophical ideas and a new social order. He called for the creation of social insurance and retirement funds for the elderly, the abolition of all forced work for peasants, as well as freedom of trade. Both before and during the revolution, he served on the Gunpowder Commission, which greatly improved the quality of French munitions. However, as a former member of the Ferme Générale, a private tax collecting system under the monarchy, Lavoisier fell afoul of the radical revolutionaries and was declared a traitor by the convention. In 1794, upon his arrest, Lavoisier, who had been conducting an experiment in his laboratory at the Royal Arsenal, requested a few days more to continue his work. The judge refused. The Republic needs neither scientists nor chemists before sending him to the guillotine. Man, this is so frustrating and unbelievable that such dumb idiot revolutionaries, just like the current day rioters, all so short-sighted, not able to think through the implications of their vision, so to say, that they became to power. It is just unimaginable. And there was so much human capital and knowledge lost by killing off people like this Lavoisier. It's just crazy. Overall benefit to mankind surely decreased, or welfare and potential future prosperity decreased as a result of these idiotic revolutionaries. I mean, of course, it's good to abolish the monarchy and limit the church power. I'm all for that, but do it in a better way than immediately grabbing power and just killing off everybody who is not agreeing with you. But I really find it karma that most of them themselves also went to the guillotine. But still, it is tragic overall, nonetheless. Lavoisier's wife Marie-Anne worked alongside her husband in the laboratory as translator and assistant. She is largely responsible for securing his legacy as a scientist after the revolution. Yeah, this was a really probably respectable dude who actually put his life totally in the name of science. He actually asked not to prolong his death sentence with a couple of days for himself, but to finish his experiments. That is amazing dedication. Such a guy deserves a statue, and instead his head is being chopped off. Unbelievable. That guy has like genes and probably that were better kept in society than killed off. He was a man of reason. But whatever. Baphomet is an occult figure of worship, usually depicted with the head of a goat, featuring large horns and sometimes with wings. That would really annoy me. Either put my wings in your picture or don't. Don't just sometimes give me wings. What about my wings is forgettable to you? I've got wings, for goodness sake. You always do the goat's head, don't you? Well, give me my bloody wings then. Alright, again, super lame. Transcripts of the trials of the Knights Templar seem to indicate that Baphomet may have been worshipped among them, although that is inconclusive. It's possible that the Knights Templar brought these beliefs back with them from their journeys during the Crusades. Carmelite nuns. Alright, how long do I still have? I can do a bit longer than 40 minutes. Let's do a couple more. Because the size is a lot smaller than being in-game. Because the recording has to capture less color differences, changes. It's all just a static menu mostly. The Carmelite nuns. The confiscation of the clergy's properties decreed by the National Assembly in November 1789 was opposed by many of those who belonged to religious orders, including the Carmelite nuns of Compiègne. In February 1790, with the dissolution of the monastic orders, French nuns were asked to return to their homes. However, they refused. Ousted in 1792, they found refuge at the homes of villagers. However, with the Reign of Terror in 1794, houses were searched to ensure that no nuns were being hidden. 16 Carmelite nuns were arrested in June 1794 and held at the Conciergerie in Paris. During the ensuing trial, prosecutor Fouquier Tinville affirmed that they were accused of having secret counter-revolutionary meetings and continuing to be loyal to their religious order and their authority. They were guillotined at the Place du Trône on July 17, 1794. On May the 27th, 1906, they were beatified by Pope Pius X. Crazy what happened there. Peaceful nuns just decapitated. Charles Henri Sanson, the executioner and master of France's national razor, one of a long line of executioners and an iconic character of the terror. Concerned about the strain on his shoulders and back if he were to perform the numerous executions demanded by a revolution, he supported the adoption of the guillotine as a more efficient method. The poor little lamb. I hope they gave him one of those special office chairs too. Yeah, alright, this is a pretty funny footnote for a change. He kept meticulous records and notched up some 3,400 severed heads. I think notched up is code for knocked off. Crazy. Charlotte Corday, a young woman best known for assassinating the radical journalist Jean-Paul Marat in 1793. Corday knew that Marat was a leading Jacobin with a hand in the Reign of Terror and felt his continued provocation would descend France into civil war. She entered his home under the guise of providing a list of Girondists that were planning an uprising in Caen. Upon receiving an audience with Marat, she stabbed him in the chest and he soaked in a medicinal bath. Corday was executed for the murder 4 days later. Dauphin Louis Charles, this little Duke of Normandy, became Dauphin upon the death of his elder brother on June 4th, 1789. In the midst of the crisis at the Estates General, as a scrawny child, he grew badly and suffered from tuberculosis, from which he would eventually die. His 3 years in prison at the Temple would worsen his state of health, but were not the direct cause of his death, no more than the abuse seemingly inflicted upon him by his keeper, the cobbler Antoine Simon. Simon was a brute, but not a conscious torturer. He insisted on teaching Louis well-known dirty songs. Recognized by the émigré as Louis XVII in 1793, I have no idea what the émigré are. He died alone in the darkness of his cell on June the 8th, 1795. His death led to all sorts of outrageous theories. Some claimed the child had escaped from the temple. In subsequent years, a number of phony dauphins would come forth to claim the title. Alright. Let's quickly, as a last item in this episode, search for Les Émigrés 1793. One moment, I made a typo. Armée des émigrés were counter-revolutionary armies raised outside France by and out of royalist emigres with the aim of overthrowing the French Revolution, reconquering France and restoring the monarchy. These were aided by royalist armies within France itself, such as the Chouans, and by allied countries such as Great Britain. They fought, for example, at the siege of Lyon and Toulon. Alright, so recognized by the émigré as Louis XVII in 1793, he died alone. Alright, interesting. Already past the 40-minute marker, guys. I will continue in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed. I hope to see you there. For the meantime, do not forget, always do keep on gaming. See you later.